Good afternoon, this is Clark Neighbors with BIS Commodities with the weekly recap for the week ending March 29, 2018. First of all, wish everyone a happy Easter weekend. Keep in mind the markets are not open tomorrow, Good Friday on March 30th. Close the week with a crescendo today, coming off the quarterly planted acreage and stocks report. But before we get there, just kind of an update where the markets have done over the last week and the last month, or for the month of March. Now, corn was up about 14 cents today based off that report. For the week, corn up 13 cents. For the month of March, up about 6. Beans closed the session today, depending on the month, 25 to 30 higher, giving for the week up 16 cents, but for the month, still down about 11 cents. Wheat up 6 cents today, closing the week down 9. And wheat for the month of March down 40 cents. In the livestock sector, pretty ugly week and ugly month as we continue to see liquidation by the funds in this sector. Cattle down $2.50 on the week, down about $10 for the month. And hogs down $1.50 on the week with a $10 lower market for the month of March. And also energies, crude oil down 75 cents for the week, but still $3 higher for the month. As I mentioned earlier, planted acreage and quarterly stocks report today. Just a few highlights here. First, on planted acres, that's where the higher markets came from. Corn acres came in at 88 million acres. This is versus the trade guess at about 89.4, and versus last year right at about 90 million acres. Soybeans came in at 89 million acres. Trade was looking for something around 91 million acres, and we had about 90 million acres last year. So you can see as a combo between the corn and the beans, we're down about 3 million acres from a year ago. Some of this can be resolved by looking at wheat. Wheat acres up about 1.5 million acres, most of that in the spring wheat category. And if you look at some state-by-state breakdowns on some of these numbers as far as corn acres, some highlighted states with lower acreage, 200,000 in Illinois, 250,000 acres in Indiana, 400,000 in Kansas, 550 in Minnesota, spring wheat country, 250,000 acres in Nebraska, and also 370 in North Dakota. So that's where a majority of the lower corn acres reflected. And as regards to the beans, Iowa 200,000 less, Kansas 250,000 less, Minnesota down 250, Nebraska down 100, Ohio down 250. Net, bean acres down a little over 1 million acres from last year. The big increases, and again in the spring wheat, Minnesota up 440,000 acres, and North Dakota up a little over 1 million acres on spring wheat. So the market seemed to grab these headlines today and the planted acres and computer-driven market into the month. We saw huge moves in the grains today, led by both the corn and the beans. Now, before we reflect on that too much more, let's look at the stocks report from today. Corn stocks, this is stocks as of March 1st. Corn 8.89 billion bushels. Trade was looking for 8.7. See, about 180 million, 190 million more stocks than the trade was looking for. Stocks a year ago were 8.62, so we're looking at about 250 million more in stocks in corn than a year ago. A little bit of a surprise in some people's eyes, some analysts' eyes, based on the fact of the feed usage numbers, that because the animal numbers don't seem to reflect that. When you're looking at that usage number for the second quarter, saw some numbers that actually the second quarter feed number would calculate out to about 1.42 billion bushels for the quarter, and a year ago that was 1.55. doesn't measure in the account. 3% more hogs on feed right now than a year ago, and about 6 or 7% more cattle. Kind of interesting on those numbers. But having said that, stocks on soybeans, 2.107 billion bushel. That is about 80 million bushels more than what the trade was looking for. And last year we had 1.74, so you're roughly 275 million more bushels of beans in the country than a year ago. Wheat stocks 1.5, right in line with what the trade was looking for. So if you look at the stocks number, the interesting thing, the big jump in the stocks number on the corn comes basically from one state. We're up 266 million bushels from a year ago, and 250 of that comes from Illinois. The balance in the Midwest is kind of down in this state, up in that state. So not sure how to explain that, why Illinois is so much more than as far as change in the other states, but that's where we're seeing that number reflected. And as far as on the bean stocks, every state is up in stocks. The big increase, Illinois also up 98 million in stocks from a year ago. Iowa's up 56, Minnesota 36, Nebraska 25. So bigger stocks and smaller planted acres. And if you look at the reflection of the bigger stocks versus what's perceived to be smaller planted acres, running those numbers together, they kind of offset each other in the big scheme of things. But again, based on a very bearish stocks number and a bullish planted acreage number obviously gained the momentum as far as the computers are concerned, and we see that market run strongly today. Keep in mind, today was also the end of the month, the end of the first quarter, so from an investment standpoint there may have been some money flows that contributed to that. And interestingly enough, funds have been long cattle and have been long hogs. We've seen some small deductions in that length over the last few weeks. As I mentioned earlier, the cattle and the hogs are both down about a $10 a hundred here for the month of March. But shortly after 11 o'clock, when the quarterly stocks report came out and the planted acreage report came out, cattle market took a big hit based on the higher corn values. Feeder market took a huge hit, and 2 of the feeder months ended up closing down $4.50, which is the limit, and also 2 months of cattle closed down the $3 limit. So fairly interesting how that all transpired during the day. So the grain market rally had some obviously some adverse effects in the livestock sector today. So moving forward with these numbers, these are the planted acreage numbers we have until we see a change as we get into the June crop report. Keep in mind, this is not an S&D supply and demand report today. It's strictly a stocks report. So the April supply and demand should reflect some of the changes in today's stocks numbers. So that'll be interesting to see here in about 10 days. And also, keep in mind, in May, so 45 days from now, will be the first supply and demand that the USDA will put together a supply and demand for the 2018-2019 crop. So as a whole, a lot of volatility built in this market today. Would assume we see some reflection in that volatility as we move into next week. And as we go into the U.S. growing season, obviously it's going to be interesting to see fund positioning. And next week the calendar will say April 1st, so spring weather will become front and center as far as the talking point daily on the grain markets. Again, we wish everyone a very happy Easter. If you have any questions, feel free to call us at BIS Commodities. Phone number is 800-373-2525. Catch us on the web at biscommodities.com. And again, everyone have a very happy Easter, and we'll see you next week.